I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and I didn't know anyone in the area except for the family my dad was friends with, a single mom with 3 kids. Luckily there was a girl a couple of years older than me. She was 12 at the time I met her, and we got to know each other a little over a couple of years. We weren't close, but we ended up having the same friends. One night my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because my friend's mom was at work. Her mother has been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just their mom, since she knocks a certain way when coming in, and he answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there and he took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out through talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's working schedule. She came in. This is where I don't know the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbor's house to call the police. The lady brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitated her, and left her body naked in a bathtub. She even hid her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. It happened to my wife's grandmother about 15 years ago while we were still dating. Her husband had just passed away about a year previously, but she'd been going down to the library and volunteering. It was exercise and socialization. This was in the winter, so her walk back was while it was getting dark. The library closed at 5 and there was some extra stuff to do before everyone actually left. And on this particular night, she turned down a ride from another volunteer because she needed to stay in shape. The house is about a mile away through some lightly wooded area in South Texas, and as she's about halfway home, she notices someone behind her. He's walking the same direction and gaining on her, which in itself isn't all that particular. She's old and thus not particularly fast, but in this case he seems vaguely sinister. They keep walking. Pretty soon he's right behind her. Then he falls into pace, just staying behind her. Now she knows something's up. But she's almost home. She can see the top of her driveway coming up, and she leaves her lights on so it'll look like someone's home when she's walking in. She just needs to make it another 150 yards, then 100. All that time, she said he was so close that she could feel his breath on her neck. Around maybe 50 yards, it happens. A strong hand on her shoulder. "Okay, bitch, don't turn around and hand over your purse or I'll cut you." She stops for a second, then takes one big step forward, turns, and shoots the guy in the neck with the .38 she keeps in her purse. The guy spent the next 5 years in a prison hospital before he died of complications. My wife's grandmother passed last year, but up to the end, she lamented that she pulled the trigger too soon. When I was young, I'd say 8 to 11-ish, my sister, whom is 7 years older, would babysit when my parents were out. At the time, she smoked a lot and my parents made her smoke outside, of course. So I'd follow her outside, play around, annoy her and such. One day my sister notices a car at the end of the driveway, just sitting in the road. It's a white SUV with a bike rack on top. It has the most tinted windows I've ever seen. You could not see inside from the side. It sat there until she went inside, then would drive to the end of the road and sit at the church parking lot and wait until she'd come out again for another smoke, and it would repeat this. Odd, but my sister is a brave lady and just kind of ignored it. That is, until the next day while my parents were out again, and it showed up again. It would sit at the end of the driveway and just watch. I don't know what the driver was doing, but he was watching my sister. I know, because if I didn't go out, I'd watch from the front window and it would just sit there and watch my sister. She told my father, who was a sheriff deputy at the time, and he called the cops and made a complaint. They showed up, looked around, but the SUV was nowhere to be seen. Months went by and nothing. Then one day, a good 9 months after this had all started and around 4 months since the last sighting, it was back. It became a regular occurrence. Another day, my sister was outside doing her nasty habit, And sure enough, here it comes. This time we were all alone as usual, and she decides she's had enough. She tells me to stay in the carport and she's gonna go confront them. She starts walking toward the SUV, and halfway down the driveway, she would later remark to us, "I felt utter terror, like I knew if I went any further, I was dead. I was paralyzed by pure fear." She turned around and went inside. Finally, the family car was in the shop for some kind of issue, so we were all stuck home for the night. While my parents are home, my sister goes outside to smoke. I go outside with her, and eventually the SUV shows up. She tells me to run inside and tell my father, and I do. My dad promptly gets his gun and starts briskly walking down the driveway with it in hand, in the direction of the SUV, but not leveled towards it. The SUV floored it down the road and peeled out onto the nearby large highway. My dad, being a cop, noted the year and model and distinguishing features. The scariest thing, the license plate had been covered in duct tape. We never saw it again. I was just 4 or 5 years old and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of the hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the 1st floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer, and my mom had a window open in her room, which was directly behind the bed above the headboard. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night and remember sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the doorframe of my mom's room. I should note her door was open and you could partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat was typically always in bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom and woke her up. In the 3 or 4 seconds it took me to wake her up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up at the doorframe, and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of the bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out of the screen window. She quickly followed and we were able to start screaming for help and someone called 911. The police came but didn't see any signs of forced entry, only that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe that the man must have exited that way. The strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night with the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened up our water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. One day while doing my laundry, one of the lights blew out in my basement. My basement is set up so that the laundry room is split up from the other side of the basement with a wall and a door. In order to get upstairs, you have to exit the laundry room and go through the other part of the basement. So the light blew in the other part, not the laundry room. As it was the only light on that side, it was pretty dark. I finished the laundry I had to do while dreading the walk through the dark basement. I exit the laundry room, get halfway through the basement, and I hear a loud cackle. Imagine a sound people make when they imitate a witch. Take that and imagine the witch had been smoking for 50 years, making her voice deeper and hoarser. That's what I heard, clear as day, right behind me. I didn't hesitate to bolt for the stairs. I waited until my father got home and then changed the bulb. I have yet to hear that cackle since, and I've not told a single person in the house about it. This happened to a friend of mine. She told me about it about a year or so ago. We'll call her Minji. Minji is in her late 20s and works as an English tutor in South Korea. One evening, a few years ago, she was tutoring a high school boy. They were up studying pretty late and the buses stopped running. Being a long way from his house, the boy asked if he could crash on her floor overnight and get the first bus in the morning. Minji was very reluctant because inviting a teenage male student to stay the night didn't sound like a great idea, but he was begging her and eventually she relented. They went back into her one-room apartment and she got into the bed while he laid a blanket out on the floor and they both fell asleep. A few hours later, At maybe 2 a.m., the boy wakes Minji up. "I'm really hungry," he says. "Let's go get some food." Minji opens her eyes and looks up at him in disbelief. "Food? Now?" "It's 2 a.m., go back to bed." But the student insists. "No, I'm so hungry, let's eat something now." She tells him that there's some ramen in the kitchen and he could fix himself some. This doesn't satisfy him. He doesn't want ramen. "There's a 24-hour place just down the road. Let's go there." Eventually, after several minutes of persuasion, the boy gets Minji to come with him to the restaurant. They leave the apartment and head out. As soon as they're on the street, the boy turns to Minji and says, "I'm not hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there." They call the police and discover that a homeless man had been living in Minji's apartment, sleeping under the bed for 2 months. The boy only saw him because he was lying on the floor, so he had a clear view under the bed. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all 2-lane road through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley. So I was driving by myself in the afternoon and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I'm driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes. A suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere and 2 bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber a round. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Something was just wrong. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive. Past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right of the woman, behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it down, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it, or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple of 100 feet and slowed down, so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the 2 bodies had gotten up to their knees, and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor, and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies, or stopped my car closer to them. Some friends and I were doing some night fishing on the James River. We were sitting along the shoreline with a nice fire going, accompanied by the usual idle talk and a few beers, when suddenly, everyone just stopped talking, like a switch was flipped off. We were all staring across the river and felt as if something, or someone, was staring back. It was a very uneasy feeling, to which some of the group tried to shake off with typical macho humor, when a blood-curdling sound erupted from the other shore that froze everyone in their tracks. The sound was unlike any other that I had ever heard, and it made every hair on my body vibrate and tingle. The only way I could describe it is it sounded like a wild person with no language skills being gutted alive. No words, just this high-pitched blood-curdling scream. Nobody moved or said a word. We all just sat there fixed in our stare, when just as suddenly, a second scream was let loose with even more force than the first. By this time, several of us were sprinting to our trucks that were parked a few yards away, retrieving various firearms. When we got back, we all sat there quietly, with our eyes fixed staring toward the opposite shore, watching the light from our fire reflecting off the rocks. We sat there waiting for another scream, or something to move on the other side of the river. Finally, a third scream came just as suddenly, but this time, it was on our side of the river, coming from the bushes about a yard away. We all hightailed out of there, leaving most of our stuff behind. When we got to our trucks, we heard the scream one more time, just beyond the tree line. We all floored it the hell away from there, and never found out what was making the sounds. It was a Friday night, and my friend was picking me up in his car from my house. I was in a hurry since we were running late for the hockey game in the city. The whole car ride there, we were having such a good time that I hadn't even noticed that I didn't have my phone. I searched the car seat, the floor, but it wasn't in the car. I was sure that I had just forgotten it. During the hockey game, I couldn't stop worrying that maybe I had dropped my phone somewhere, so I borrowed my friend's phone and ran to the bathroom. I dialed my number and hoped someone at my house would pick up. It took 3 rings before somebody picked up, but they remained silent on the other end. I yelled into the phone that I was just checking if I had left my phone at home. They didn't answer. I assumed it was my little brother just messing with me, so I hung up. I got home late that night to see that my parents weren't home. I got inside my house and called them to see where they were. They told me that they had gone out to eat and see a concert at the park with my little brother. They said they left soon after I had for the game, and they should be home in around half an hour. So I hung up and proceeded to look for my cell phone. But then I realized, how could somebody in my family have picked up my phone if they hadn't been home? I felt a pain in my stomach as fear swept over. It was at that moment that I heard the back door to my house open and close. I immediately jolted out the front door to the neighbors and called the police. Apparently, the back door was left open and somebody had simply walked into our house. Nothing was stolen, but the scariest thing is the thought that we could have fallen asleep with a stranger in the house. A while back, there was a family that moved in next door to my family. They had a son who was just twisted. He was obsessive over slasher movies and always wanted me to talk about shit that happened during my time serving in Vietnam that no normal person would want to hear. He also loved tormenting stray animals. This guy was a whack job. He was 19 at the time and my daughter was 7, but he always wanted to talk to her. He'd strike up conversation with her when she walked home from school. He would talk over the fence at her when she was playing in the back. But what really set me off was when he called our house looking to speak to her. That was it. I went over and flipped shit at him and his parents. Told him to stay the hell away from her and I'd better not ever see him again. That's when things got weird. My daughter was always a little imaginative and paranoid. She would think there were monsters under her bed and whatnot, so when she told me there was something living in her closet and she was too scared to get up and tell us at night, but it wasn't there in the daytime, we blew it off as no big deal. A few weeks went by and one night my wife and daughter were staying at my mother's for a girls' night, so I turned the key on the HBO box and watched me some movies, eventually falling asleep downstairs. At around 2 a.m., I get a call from my neighbor with a creepy son, telling me something along the lines of, "We saw that you were up, so we called. Our son is missing. I went by his room to use the bathroom and his door was open, which isn't usual, and there was no sign of him. We need help looking for him." The phone call woke me up though. I wasn't up, so I asked why they thought I was. "Oh, we saw you walking around upstairs and the light is on." My blood ran cold as ice. I'd been passed out on the couch and I know no one turned any lights on. I hung up on them, ran outside to my truck to grab my shotgun, but noticed the sheriff pulling up to my neighbor's house by this point. I booked it over and told him there was someone in my house, and now I could see the lights in my daughter's room were on, and there was a silhouette pacing back and forth. When the deputies went in, they found the neighbor boy there waiting in my daughter's room with a nice little setup in her closet. He said he liked to watch her sleep in the moonlight.